You're listening to episode 103 of The Secular Buddhist. Welcome to The Secular Buddhist. I'm Ted Meissner. The Secular Buddhist is the official podcast of the Secular Buddhist Association, a grassroots-driven effort to answer the needs of secular teaching and practice for contemporary society. The podcast has interviews and roundtable discussions pertaining to engaged Buddhist training and practice, and the SBA website has show notes for each episode along with resource materials. Though the podcast focuses on core practice from a secular viewpoint, more traditional teachings are welcome and openly discussed. Authors Gay Hendricks and Tinker Lindsay join us to talk about their new Buddhist-themed detective novel, The First Rule of 10. Hi everyone. We've had some deep episodes lately, delving into our practice and ideals of Buddhism to the growing of the secular community. So today I'd like to take a step over to more lighthearted fare and talk about something we don't get to talk about very often. A fiction detective novel with a Buddhist lead character, Tenzin. Of course, we sneak in some practice components too, especially around collaboration and how we work with others in our lives. Gay Hendricks, Ph.D., has served for more than 35 years as one of the major contributors to the fields of relationship transformation and body-mind therapies. Along with his wife, Dr. Kathleen Hendricks, Gay is the co-author of many bestsellers, including Conscious Loving and 5 Wishes. He is the author of 33 books, including The Corporate Mystic, Conscious Living, and The Big Leap. Dr. Hendricks received his Ph.D. in counseling psychology from Stanford in 1974. After a 21-year career as a professor of counseling psychology at University of Colorado, he and Kathleen founded the Hendricks Institute, which is based in Ojai, California, and offers seminars worldwide. Tinker Lindsay writes and edits screenplays, books, book proposals, business plans, film treatments, and brochures. Her goal as a writer is to tell the truth, and her goal as a consultant, ghostwriter, and conceptual editor is to shape ideas into persuasive prose without losing the author's vision or voice. Tinker believes the collaborative process should be as enriching as the end product is satisfying. Skill and concentration are great, but humor's what lightens the load in the wee hours. So, sit back, relax, and have a nice Chimay White. I'm probably mispronouncing that, but it's the beer Tenzin drinks. And our guests today for a roundtable discussion, we have 2 guests, is Gay Hendricks.
Hello.
And Tinker Lindsay.
Hi.
Thank you both for being here. What we're going to be talking about today is the new book, The First Rule of 10. And I'm very excited about this because we don't often get to see fiction books that are based in Buddhist-type themes. So I'm very eager to find out more about that and share that with the audience. But what I'd like to start with is for each of you to tell us a little bit about your background and in particular how it contributed to this particular project. Gay, why don't we start with you?
Well, I think if I go back to the very beginnings of it, my mom, when I was about maybe 8 or 9 years old, gave me one year for my birthday a Hardy Boys book. I don't know if you remember those or not.
Oh, but, that takes me back. Yes, we have a collection in my house. Absolutely.
Yeah. And this particular Hardy Boys book had them going to Tibet. And I remember just being fascinated with it. And I actually got a globe and looked up where Tibet was. And I developed this early idea that I really someday wanted to go to Tibet. And later on, many years later in my life, I'd become an avid bicyclists and particularly mountain bikes when they were first coming in. I was out in Colorado at the time, and so I made this vow. I was going to be the first person to ride into Lhasa, Tibet on a mountain bike. And sure enough, I got to be one of the first 12 people that got mountain bike visas to go into Tibet. So I actually got to fulfill my dream. And I've had this dream also of writing a mystery novel since I fell in love with Sherlock Holmes when I was a kid. And so here we are now 40 years later, and the dream has come true.
That's wonderful. What a great story. Now that's, I know there was a Nancy Drew book, The Secret of the Tibetan Treasure, but I don't recall which one it was, The Hardy Boys. So folks who are listening to the podcast, I'll try to find that and get it linked on the episode page for this episode for those who are curious. So that is an interesting story, and you get to fulfill that dream and write that book. That's wonderful.
Yeah, it was really one of the most deepest and most fun parts of it for me was creating a character. I wanted to create a character that I would be fascinated with. And, you know, I've now lived with our character Tenzing Norbu for the last couple of years. And the more I have him around, the more I see aspects of his character, and I'm really fascinated that this is a whole series of books we're writing, and we're launching this first one, but we have big plans for the others too. And so I'm really fascinated to see how he develops, because he's already become such a complicated character to me that I can't wait every day to find out what he does next.
It sounds wonderful, and I'm eager to get it myself. Tinker, let's move over to you and your background and what drew you to this project and your collaborative part in it.
Well, I could talk for hours on that, but I won't.
You have 2 hours is good.
I just wanted to say that I actually working with Gay has combined really 2 passions of mine. One are mysteries and one is mindfulness, practicing mindfulness. And yes, I was an avid mystery reader as a child too. And in fact, when I was in the 7th and 8th grades and we started writing compositions, I would always write weird compositions that were actually little tiny mysteries, kind of dark. And at the end, it would always be, and they found out she was dead before the auto crash, or, that kind of thing. Poor other kids in my class would look at me with these big eyes, or a clue was found pinned to a lampshade, and it's, anyway, it's my favorite kind of reading. It's certainly my mindful escape. It's not really mindful. I love losing myself in mystery books. And I've had a meditation practice of one sort or another for the last 30 years, but in the last 12 or so, I have been going up to Spirit Rock, which is up in Northern California, and that's the Theravada Buddhist strain, and also doing more reading, and I've been working with a therapist who is a Buddhist, and I basically a few years ago, that translated into actually working with an Indian director, Nalin Pan, on a movie about Buddha. I'm also a screenwriter and spent some time in India. And all of these things came together when I was contacted by Gay about working on a manuscript that he had completed that was a detective mystery set in Los Angeles, where I live, featuring a ex-monk, rebellious ex-monk, current cop turned private investigator, and would I like to work on it with him? And really, if you need a neon sign to tell you what the right turn to take is. Also, by the way, Gay is, among other things, an extraordinary author, nonfiction author, best-selling nonfiction author with many, many books having to do with relationships and self-awareness, and having been through a failed marriage, I had 3 of his books on my bookcase, well thumbed. So I said, yes, I would be interested. And the collaboration has been, we were talking about it yesterday, seamless and inspiring. And I think Tenzing is as real to me as he is to Gay, and is his own person, by the way. And also, since your expertise is in secular Buddhism, what I find most fascinating and most creatively inspiring and challenging in our character is he has spent the last 10 years living in Los Angeles, working in as a police detective, LAPD, in the last 5 years, homicide detective, and is constantly balancing the challenges of having been raised in a monastery in Dharamshala and all of that with a world that is pushing against every moment of that, and he is having to find his own way. So while the roots are deeply in Buddhism, he's kind of, to me, a warrior, a spiritual warrior for our time. And I really relate to how he is constantly checking himself and trying to have both worlds be authentic for him.
It's very interesting that you bring that up, because I have some association with law enforcement, and I know that the work of Sherry Maples from the site mindfulnessandjustice.org is another person who's in law enforcement and yet is an experienced and practiced teacher of meditation. And so we do see, and of course there are others as well, we do see this practice of a meditative awareness, of mindfulness in many different forms, and whether it takes a more traditional form, as it may sometimes with your character, for example,
yes,
or for those of us who have a Western background, we are actually seeing this. This is not too much of a reach for people, and how we engage with that practice is going to find its own particular manifestations based on who we are. And I expect you saw that with the development of your character as well.
Yes. One thing that I picture when I think of Tenzing and the journey he's on is a set of concentric circles. He has this clear center at the center of himself, and as he tries to extend that out further and further into the world, he runs up against different barriers that he has to solve. Like in this book, he's also working on some aspects of his own relationship world. It's partly a story about moving through barriers to love, and will continue to be so, because that's one of the basic things that every human being has to deal with. And we define ourselves by how open we are to love. And he's on that journey himself in his own particular way. So there are kind of different sets of concentric circles. Another one is the way he attempts to live out his spiritual principles out in the gritty, violent world that he finds himself in, and some of the people that he comes into contact with. And there again, that any of us that have ever had a spiritual practice, that is the practice, really.
Yes, those transitions. Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
We were talking in several of the podcasts recently on the evolution, not just of Buddhism itself as it finds new grounds and new cultures and with new memes, but that our own personal practice evolves over time. I just released an interview with John Peacock where we spoke briefly about that, and in another interview with Sue Blackmore, we had the same thing come up, that how the reasons for which we start our practice are not necessarily the reasons that we have at various stages as we continue on. That does actively change. Now, when you two were collaborating on the character, and you had this a really great idea of what his background would be, have you seen that as you were developing it out and writing the book and forming what will become the full series, that there is an ongoing evolution of his practice and his engagement with it?
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and I'm glad you brought up this process of collaboration, because the collaboration that evolved between Tinker and me as we wrote this book turned out to me to be one of the great spiritual gifts of my life, that I feel like I kind of put out a request for somebody to help me with the character and help me develop some aspects of the story. and an angel answered the ad. So I've always felt since I met her that Tinker was an angel masquerading as a writer so that we had a name to call her by here on planet Earth. But
That is so nice.
I
I don't know how Buddhist that is, but I'll take it.
Yeah, we'll take that. Go with it. Just go with it. And that in itself, when we talk about collaboration and Gay, this will actually be a segue because I always want us to talk about your other work a little bit as well, is relationships. And I know from Theravada practice and the Pali-Can, and at some point the Buddha is speaking with Ananda and makes the point that the whole of this life is the friends that we have on this path. And that's just such a strong spotlight on this isn't what happens solely in our own heads on the cushion. This is how we interact and support lovingly and compassionately and with joy at each other's success with each other. That's where the practice comes in.
I completely agree. I really appreciate you bringing that out, because my way of saying that to my students, I say the universe is our relationships with each other. That whatever is in the universe comes to life in our relationships with each other, and everyone in the universe, whether it's the smallest particle or the largest planet or star, it's an individual that lives in relationship to everything else. And so, I remember first being astonished in my life that the moon, 240,000 miles away, had an effect on the water here. And I remember trying to get my head around that, and saying, wow, how can that be? But that just tells you that what we are is a matrix in which we move through that matrix in relationship to other people. And in my view, it's love that depends on how we do move through that matrix. That if we are kind of stuck in fear at any given point, then we'll move through it kind of like molasses. But as we open up to more love and awareness, what happens is the molasses transforms into air and then space, and then it becomes much easier to move through.
Yeah, we become more flexible and extensible with the open-minded awareness, and it's not to say for those of us who are the skeptics listening to the podcast, I'm right there with you. I'm very active in your community. I am. It's not to say that our brains are falling out when we have our minds that open. We're not saying that, but what we are saying is that when we do things like last night, there was a live video broadcast that Fraser Cain and Phil Plait were doing, and it was on the moon, which is what you were just saying, Gabe, made me think of this. And just that activity, that choice of participation, and the wonder at what they were doing just with the technology. And they had another individual who was looking at Jupiter. This was inspirational, and it's not that, the moon itself has a tidal impact on our physical bodies because we're made up of mostly water. No. That's not what we're saying. But we are saying that we make choices every moment in how we engage with things, even non-substantial thoughts and feelings. These are processes, and we are processes. So it's a very simple choice to make. I'll engage more positively, but sometimes challenging to do. Tinker, why don't you tell us a little bit about some of those challenges that you may have faced in your practice with having that positive engagement. What are some of the stumbling blocks that you have had that I expect many of us have had?
Well, I think that's exactly one of the I would say really positive experiences I've had even in writing this book, because Tenzing is us, and we are Tenzing as far as I'm concerned. And, for myself, just specifically, well, two things that came up for me listening to you. One is that I have come to believe that the highest place of spirituality is actually being the most authentic and human. It's not some brass ring to be grabbed, and all I have to do is watch the Dalai Lama to know that there is that human being, your most human, is being your highest self if you can do so, in a compassionate and non-judgmental way, and even allowing the fact. I mean, for me, it's been my practice, especially in the last decade or so, has been in first recognizing all of my feelings, and then allowing them, and then not acting on them.
Yeah,
So
yeah, exactly.
but it is not denying them, and it
Right,
is
right.
not disallowing them, and it is not resisting them, because then I really am creating a different self than my own authentic self to other people, and that creates exactly what I most don't want to have happen, which is separation. So, and I find that, with writing Tenzing, it's possible to give him a fairly higher than I have, degree of it's more heartfulness than mindfulness. I mean, it's just understanding how his physiology and how his emotions are responding to different situations. Sometimes he understands it a little bit late. The first rule of 10 is actually not to ignore those intuitive tickles, because if you ignore them, they will come back ultimately as a sledgehammer, or in his case, a bullet, a mangled bullet. But working with a character who's it's in his DNA, it's in his childhood, it's in the things that he's learned to be that perceptive, is actually helping me to be more perceptive. Because he's got it's. I mean, I would say just another quick answer to what you're saying is, Gay mentioned, not being afraid of certain things. That's a big one for me. Even stepping into this very, very intimate collaboration with Gay in an area that in the past I haven't always had success, because people's egos and fear can really block the full blooming of a creative collaboration, and can make it very, very difficult. I found the absolute opposite working with Gay. I have to tell anybody who's listening, if you're going to collaborate with someone, find someone who has done all that work and is willing to just say, you can do no wrong. And then it just creates such an amazing arena for the best to come out for both of us. So I'm so grateful for that.
I found that in collaboration as well, that they do best, and I've seen this a great deal with just the development of the Secular Buddhist Association work, is the openness to not have ownership over things, not have that attachment, allows it to grow so much more. Gay, tell me about some of the things that, in keeping with that in that collaboration, aspects of the character of 10 that have really had an impact on your life since you started the project.
Great question. Well, one thing in working with Tinker is that it's kind of like I'm a bass player and I hit this chord, the bottom of the chord, and then she comes in with the guitar and ding, and makes the rest of the chord happen. And it's for me, I like to capture the rhythms of things. I love to capture the rhythm of conversation and the rhythm of dialogue and that kind of thing. And so what I'm not always good at is amplifying the deeper dimension of people's emotions and what goes on in their minds as an event occurs. And so that's where I feel like I really have been in this really great dance with Tinker, because I'm able to hand things off to her and then she hands them back to me, and I add a little riff, and then I hand them back to her and she adds a cool 8-bar riff and then hands it back to me. And so it grows like that. And it's the handoff that's so elegantly simple and easy with a great collaborator like Tinker, though the handoff is where a lot of the friction and persona stuff comes out, where I take something I've written and she changes it or something like that. And in the past, I can see times when I would have gotten upset about things like that. And yet in this situation, it always went so much better than I could have imagined in the first place that it didn't tempt me for a moment to hold on to anything at any point. And so it became an exercise in incredible fluidity for me. It actually, well, I mean, it's the best kind of spiritual practice.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, and that's what you described so beautifully, is that creative, collaborative process, and I like your use of the metaphor of music, because we see that in the Pali Canon with the strings being too tight or too loose. They need to be just right, but you're taking it to an additional dimension of social interaction, and how I often like to describe the ethics, the morality component of the Eightfold Path, is that's our social interaction, and this mutually supportive contributions that you make to one another's work. That's where true growth and creativity come in.
Yes, and I think what I feel lucky about is that because I have worked quite a bit in screenplay writing and in filmmaking, and honestly, if you're not able to collaborate, you can't survive in that arena, because it is by its very nature a series of handoffs. Having said that, many people cannot tolerate that experience that Gay was describing, of letting go of your baby and letting someone else raise them for a little while, and then they let go of their baby and give it back to you. But of course, in the Buddhist tradition, I mean, it's the classic: are we going to cling or are we going to let go? And I must say that at least for me, I'm very picky, so it requires that the person be brilliant that I'm working with.
At least as brilliant as you are. Yes, that's the challenge.
Say that, I would have to say more. It has been a practice in and of itself. I like that Gay said that. And again, the character himself is, he's deeply human, and it's not that he's floating through his world and his life on a cloud. I mean, he states at the very beginning of the book that there are three things that are his greatest challenge to his practice of non-attachment, and that's his cat, his car, and his gun. So that all of it, not to be a spoiler, but they're all threatened in this book. So
yeah, how many of us who are active, openly declared Buddhists of some fashion or other can raise their hand when asked the question, yeah, I like my gun? Not many of us.
Well, that's the uniqueness of our character.
I'm going to just take that opportunity to share something that's a little odd. Is that as part of my work with law enforcement, I did make sure that I was properly safety trained with handguns, and I do go to a local shooting range now and then, and I'm very pleased to say that they have zombie targets.
Oh, that's
and it's oddly great fun to go to the range and shoot zombie targets. I know that's odd, I know, but perhaps Tenzin would understand where I'm coming from.
Perfectly.
So something else I wanted to do a little bit of a segue and attention, Gay, to your other work that Tinker referred to, and the other books that you've written, which folks listening to the podcast, I'll be sure to link several of these on the episode page for this episode. You work on relationships. Tell us more about that.
Yes, well, about 32 years ago, I had a wake-up experience that led to my meeting my wife, Kathleen, also known as Katie. If you see her on the cover of books, it usually says Kathleen Hendricks, but around the house we call her as Katie, so let's everybody do that. I had an epiphany one day. I caught myself in the middle of an argument with a woman that I'd been in kind of an on and off relationship with for 5 years. And I had this wake-up moment of realizing that it wasn't our 500th argument we were having. It was our 500th version of the same argument. And it was kind of like a giant moonbeam shined down on me in this moment and made me realize this. And I realized that our pattern would always be that, number one, somebody wouldn't be telling the truth about something to one or the other. And out of that, one of us would start to criticize the other one and blame the other one for something. And that out of that, then we would start blaming each other because, as you probably know by now in your own relationships, when you say to somebody, it's all your fault, they usually don't cheerfully agree with you and say, wow, thank you, I appreciate it.
You're right. Thanks for sharing that. Bring it out to me. Yeah.
And anyway, in the middle of this moment of waking up, I realized that I had always just assumed that all of the problems in the relationship were hers, and that if she would just quit doing this long list of things that she did, then I would be happy. And I realized suddenly in the moment that I was my own worst customer for this bit of enlightenment that had just dawned on me. And so in this moment of kind of waking up, it was popping out of the trance, I think, that I'd been in all my life. And so I actually shared that with her in the moment. I said that I just had this realization that I cause all of the problems in our relationship by either not telling the truth about something and then blaming you and then getting into a dialogue of blame with you. And her response to that, bless her heart, was kind of like, wow, well, I'm glad you finally have realized that everything is your fault. And so I didn't get rewarded for my moment of sharing there. But anyway, that led ultimately to my deciding to withdraw from that relationship. And I ended up going into a little period of meditation where I sat on the floor of my cabin and I just sat there for a long time till I figured out what I really wanted. And what I really wanted was a relationship that thrived in honesty, where both of us could speak honestly to each other, and a relationship that thrived in responsibility, where we didn't take or blame the other person. We would always just take responsibility for whatever came up, and that it was also rooted in a respect for each other's creativity and artistic development, because I was very passionate about my writing and that kind of thing. So I said to the universe, that's what I want. Please send me one of those, and I promise I'll never settle for anything less. And so I told her, it doesn't matter if it's 10 minutes from now or 10 years from now, it doesn't matter to me. Well, a month later, I met this miracle woman, Katie, and looked her in the eye and basically told her what I wanted out of life. And she said yes, and we've been together ever since. So yeah.
You see how things work with Gay, right?
Yeah, he's got the pachinko machine to the universe, so it's kind of nice.
Wonderful.
Well, one of the things that I particularly liked that you said that I expect resonates with many of the listeners, certainly with me, is that one of the greatest things that one can say to positively build on one's relationships are the magic and wonderful words, I was wrong. And just being able to acknowledge that we are flawed creatures, we do make mistakes, and our sincere acknowledgement of that and ownership of that in itself shows our strength of maturing character and helps tremendously.
I totally agree. One thing we do here in our relationship workshops is my wife and I teach couples what we call our universal mantra, which is, I could be wrong about that.
Also, I've never forgotten reading Conscious Loving, which was the first book of Gay's that I had read, and it actually answered so many things that I had been wondering about, because basically I was in a state of despair that anybody out there could even, have a description of what it was that I was longing for. And it had to do with this idea of talking about the microscopic truth. And it's all about owning what is happening inside you at a certain point that can tell you that you might be resistant or blocking or angry, and when you frame what you're feeling in that way, it just frees you. It frees you, and it frees the other person not to feel attacked. And I've been trying to use that technique to greater and lesser success at different points, but ever since, it's really it really was liberating and has changed everything for me. So such a simple thing. Practice microscopic truth with each other.
It is a very simple thing to do, but at the same time can be challenging in moment by moment practice.
Yes.
And
Yes.
that's why this is a practice, not a perfect.
Yes.
So let's switch gears a little bit and going back to the first rule of 10. Now, as you had both mentioned, this is the first book in a planned series. And I expect that in the finishing up and publishing of this book, that as you're putting that together, you didn't have enough room in this one to fit in things that you wanted to see. And you're probably going to put that stuff in subsequent books. Tinker, let's start with you. What might be some things that, you really weren't able to put it in the first book, but you want to see happen somewhere along the lines in future books in the series?
Well, I think one of the things that I most enjoy reading in reading books, any fiction book really, is how somebody overcomes their flaws. I don't want to read about a perfect person. I can't relate. In this case, Tenzing, and I also love the delicious irony of this, given that it's Gay's character that has sprung forth from Gay's mind and heart. He is very, very skilled in many areas, but he's lousy at relationships.
None of us can sympathize with that.
Exactly. And honestly, it makes sense because he was raised alternatively by a free-spirited mother of the 60s who sort of landed in Dharamshala and got impregnated by a Buddhist monk there, and then she came from America, but then moved to Paris to raise her son, and then died. So, so that was his female experience, and his male experience was a father who lives as a monk in a monastery and is basically against relationships with just about anybody. And, so what I look forward to is how he works with what he grew up with and brings it into a world where he is really, really longing for the kind of love and intimacy that we all are. So that's on the one side of it. He is not successful in this first book at maintaining a relationship that has real possibilities. And so how he learns from that over the next series of books is going to be something that I'm just delighted to be part of. And negotiating being self-employed as a private investigator is something I think many, many interesting procedures and challenges are going to be something that continue after this first book. And I love the idea that he's somebody who is open to making a big leap, to paraphrase in one of Gay's most recent books, and an excellent book, everybody, Big Leap. But he really makes a fairly risky decision for himself, which is just to go into being a private investigator, to leave this security of a police force. And what happens is that these odd and challenging cases start coming to him. And I can't wait to see how that develops, and also how that connects back to his father and his two best friends who are still monks in Dharamshala. That's coming in the second book, and it's going to continue to develop, and I just find it really, really exciting.
Oh, wonderful. Gay, how about you? What do you want to see that you couldn't fit into the first book?
Well, in the second book, he really comes face to face with an arch villain named Chaco Morales. And he has many, many criminal dimensions of him that will begin to will grapple with in that second book. The other thing, too, with Ten's development himself, he needs to go deeper into himself to access the level of consciousness that's going to allow him to break through and solve this particular crime and set of crimes that's occurred. He has to go to a deeper place in himself, and to do that, he gets stuck in some father issues that come from having been raised by this kind of stern, authoritarian father, on the other side being raised by a very loose kind of mother, loose in the sense of she's not real tight in the way she lives her life. She lives it much more freely. And so it's a kind of a clash between the Marines and the hippies at Woodstock kind of thing. And so he's going to have to come to some realizations with his father that's going to allow him to take a bigger stand in the world. So that's one thing that I'm interested in.
Interesting. Now, you mentioned the development of an arch nemesis, Morales. Is that character, do you anticipate, and it may be too early yet to see how that character grows on their own, are they going to have that archness in the same way that Moriarty has his archness in his brilliance as a mirror to Holmes' own brilliance? Is Morales going to be sort of the mindfulness used for evil kind of archness, or a character who's just so wrapped up in greed and hatred and delusion kind of archness? Are they a diametric opposite or a mirror opposite?
Oh, my goodness. Well, I'll tell you, let me just pause there and appreciate that question. This is, in my career, this is about interview number 4,979, and it's really great to be asked a fabulous question like that. So many blessings upon you. Having said that, I think that, well, I happen to know, if I may part the veils of the future for a moment, that Chaco Morales may even play a role in the third book of our series. And so who knows, but that could very well be. So we have the possibility of developing Chaco in a lot of interesting ways. And I'm not so much interested in the Dr. Evil type of criminal mastermind kind of thing that in the Austin Powers movies, that the James Bond thing, that doesn't interest me so much as how does one person get to be the repository of all evil? What are the circumstances that lead to that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that in itself is, to me, the most fascinating question with the bad guys, and why. I was in college and we'd do our, Dungeons and Dragons type things. We played the bad guys. And my favorite characters were always the anti-heroes. It wasn't the heroes. It was the tragically flawed people who were doing bad things for really what they would consider good reasons within the context. I mean, no one wakes up and says, today I'm going to be evil and twirl their mustache. No. They're doing it for reasons or conditions behind it. So I'm eager to hear about and read that ongoing development of that character, because to me those are the most fun ones. Exactly, and also it's really our challenges as the authors, and I think I think our stories are only as good as our bad guys are relatable. Honestly, I think it's in the first rule of 10, there is a shift that Tenzing himself has to make regarding one of the characters that is really I would say the overarching change that happens in him in the book itself, just exactly in that area that you're talking about. I too, you're preaching to the converted here. I am fascinated by what creates people who feel as self-righteous and justified in what they're doing as I do and what I'm doing, and yet I look at what they're doing and I see it as destructive. But that's in me too. So I just think that's something that we've really tried to do with this and want to continue to develop with this.
it's something I've just always been so drawn to that myself.
Well,
The shadows as well as the light.
well, and having that openness, and this is a very real world practice. It's very easy for us to look at someone doing something with which we disagree and associate that action with that person and say, you are a bad person because of XYZ, the specific actions, and not be able to, and again, this is our practice, step back and say, there is a person here. They're doing this for a reason that I don't understand. And when I do understand it, I may disagree with it. But there are reasons for which people behave in the ways that they do. And Gay, I think this is part of what your epiphany was about, is that realization of, oh, wait a minute, what am I actually doing here?
Yes.
That's how that contributes to our interactions, is understanding the other guy as having reasons for doing what they're doing. And that's where, to me, a well-developed anti-hero or bad guy, that's what's very riveting, because those conditions are usually far more interesting than, dancing in the flowers because he danced in the flowers. Give me a little more interesting background than that.
Exactly.
Well, I really hope that I can just see also that you're going to love what happens with Chaco Morales, because you've got the right attitude toward bad guys, and so that's what fascinates me also, is to look at how the very same circumstances create the bad guy and the good guy all at the same time.
Yes. Many of us, me included, who've been involved in law enforcement, we're driving the front seat of the squad car as opposed to being in back by one or two situational events. Either did or did not happen.
Exactly. and actually, the fact that I end up being able to write a mystery novel comes from having been unsuccessfully shot at on a few occasions.
See, these are the circumstances of our lives, and I'm glad to hear that the character, which you're going to certainly and have been spending time developing as someone to be a main character in your series about 10, is that until someone pitches them off Reichenbach Falls, they can come back.
Yes,
it's nice to see that
exactly.
He will come back, believe me.
Excellent. Well, what I'd like to do is just mention again to the folks who are listening to the podcast, there will be a link to the book, The First Rule of 10, which is the beginning of the series, on the episode page for this episode. And I will also have links to Gay Hendricks' site, which is www.hendricks.com. That's HENDRICKS. And to Tinker's site, which is tinkerlindsay.com. That's TINKERLINDSAY. And one other site I want to mention for everyone is that there is a site, which I just found out about as we were recording here, for the book itself, which is very well done. It has video on it as well. And that is dharmadetective.com. Gay Hendricks, thank you very much for being here.
Thank you so much, Ted. Great being with you.
And Tinker Lindsay, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Ted. I've been taking notes all through this for some of your things you brought up, so that's a good sign.
Thanks for listening. If you'd like to learn more about something you've heard in today's podcast, please come visit the SBA website at secularbuddhism.org, and you'll find an entire webpage devoted to this and every episode. Discussion about this episode can be found on the episode page itself, along with show notes. The music for The Secular Buddhist is used by permission from John Kaizen Neptune's CD, Steps in Time. Additional music is provided courtesy of Monty Levinson of Taihei Shakuhachi and Rodrigo Rodriguez. Their websites are also linked on the SBA site on the About Podcast Music page. Until next time, remember, every moment you have a choice. Make it the best you can, See you next time on The Secular Buddhist.